I've been married for 20 years and I never would have thought that I would want to erase all that time from my memory. It hurts me every time to remember that I lived a lie and didn't even realize it. I don't want to pretend to be a victim because I understand that this is my fault. I should have been more attentive and not too trusting, so I want to share my story and what I faced. Enjoy watching. My name is Frank Miller, and if someone asked me how I would describe my life, I would probably use the word normal. Not too exciting, but not too bad either. I live in a small but cozy house on the outskirts of the city where every house looks like a slightly altered copy of its neighbor. I have a wife, Sarah, and a daughter, Amy. My family is my beacon in this sea of everyday life. Sarah. Oh, my Sarah. She has always been more than just my wife. She is my best friend, my reliable ally, and without a doubt the most beautiful person I have ever met. Her long hair, always perfectly styled, shines in the sun like rays, and her smile can light up the darkest room. Working at the local bank, she often complains about the routine, but I know she takes pride in being able to support our family. Amy, our daughter, is already 17. She is growing up so independent and smart. She has these eyes, full of curiosity and a thirst for life. That always reminded me of Sarah when we were younger. Amy dreams of going to college next year, and I could not be a prouder father. My job, well, it's far from a dream, but it supports my family, and that's what matters most. I work at a property management company where my days are often filled with calls, meetings, and endless reports. But when I come home, tired after a long day, and see the smiles of Sarah and Amy, I realize it's all worth it. Sometimes, to add variety to my weekdays, I might treat myself to a trip to the bar and have a couple of beers with friends. One of my close friends, Kevin, often joins me. We've known each other for many years, and I value our friendship. He's someone with whom I can share everything, though sometimes I wonder how well I really know him. One Friday morning started just like many others. Sarah had already gotten up and was preparing breakfast in the kitchen, humming something to herself. It was one of those little things I loved about her, her ability to find joy in the most mundane things. I approached her from behind and hugged her, feeling the scent of her hair. She turned around and smiled at me, that kind of smile that made me forget about everything in the world. "Good morning, dear," she said, and we exchanged a kiss. In those moments, I felt like the happiest person on the planet. My relationship with Sarah always seemed to me the foundation of my existence. 20 years together, and my love for her only grew stronger with each passing day. Amy came down to the kitchen, her eyes still half asleep, but her smile blossomed at the sight of us. Sarah and I always tried to maintain an atmosphere of love and warmth in our home, and I hoped that this feeling would stay with Amy for a lifetime. After breakfast, I decided that today was a good day to visit the local bar in the evening. "How about having a couple of beers tonight? Maybe call Kevin," I suggested to Sarah, knowing she wouldn't object. She always supported my need to spend time with friends, understanding how important it was for me. "Of course, dear, that sounds great. You've earned a little break," she replied with a smile. I was grateful for her unwavering support and understanding. I sent a message to Kevin, and he, as always, responded with enthusiasm. Kevin was the person with whom I could discuss everything under the sun. Our friendship began in college, and despite all the changes in our lives, we remained close friends. Meeting him was always a kind of relief for me, an opportunity to escape from everyday worries. As usual, Kevin and I discussed our wives, watched a football match, and generally had a good time, and I happily headed home, where my beautiful wife awaited me. The next day started as usual, but with one exception. Sarah went to her parents for the weekend, and Amy went to a sleepover at her friend's. Left alone, I decided it was a great opportunity to relax and spend the evening by myself. I even thought about watching a movie that I'd been putting off for a long time. After a few hours of watching, I felt the need for a break and headed to the bathroom. But as I was about to flush the toilet, I found that it was clogged and water began to leak out. My irritation instantly grew. Such surprises always happen at the most inconvenient times. With no other options, I called a plumbing service, hoping they could quickly solve the problem. To my surprise, they arrived really fast and the job took no more than an hour. However, what followed next was a real shock to me. One of the workers seemed to have found the cause of the blockage and took out some used condoms and urged me to throw them in the trash instead of in the toilet. I was petrified. Sarah and I stopped using them a long time ago, relying on other methods of contraception. Thoughts started spinning in my head. How did they end up here? Who could it be? Is this really our daughter? But then I realized that Amy couldn't have sex, at least in our house. I just wouldn't let it happen. But I still thought I'd talk to my daughter carefully. At that moment, I realized that I had to act carefully. Deciding that a direct conversation with Sarah could wait, I tried to collect my thoughts. It was important to verify his suspicions before drawing any conclusions. I spent the rest of the evening trying to distract myself from the painful thoughts, but the images of those condoms did not leave my head. The next day, Amy came home and I decided to talk to her. "How was your friend's sleepover?" I asked. "It's fine, Dad. And how did you spend your evening?" "What is it?" She asked. "I was fine too, without incident." "I wanted to ask you, do you have any boy?" I asked. "It all depends on which one you need. Brunette, blonde, brown-haired, red-haired, fair-haired, gray-haired," she joked. "I'm serious," I said. "Dad, you and I have already discussed this many times. I'm not going to start a relationship yet. I don't want to," she said. And I realized that it was clearly not Amy. I did not tell her about yesterday's incident, deciding that it would be superfluous. My wife was supposed to return tomorrow, but the decision to turn to a private detective did not come immediately. I spent several days weighing all the pros and cons, trying to find another way out. But every path of thought brought me back to this decision. I did some preliminary searches online and found a private detective with good reviews and experience in similar cases. After making a call, I scheduled a meeting. It was important for me to meet in person, to ensure that I could trust this person with such intimate details of my life. We met at a neutral place, in a small cafe, where I told him everything about the condoms, my suspicions, and how much I value my family. I didn't hide my anxiety and fear of the potential outcome of his work. The detective listened to me attentively, not interrupting, and nodded, making notes. After I had finished, he looked me straight in the eye and promised to do his utmost to find out the truth, while maintaining the confidentiality of the information. We discussed the details, including the cost of his services and possible methods of surveillance on Sarah. I understood that I was violating the boundaries of her personal space, but my concern and desire to know the truth prevailed. After signing the contract and paying in advance, I left him to begin his work. The 2 weeks of waiting were a trial for me. I tried to behave as usual, but my act of normal family life became increasingly difficult. My looks at Sarah were filled with a mix of love and doubt, and every call or message on her phone made my heart skip a beat. I tried to hide my agitation, but sometimes I felt she sensed something was wrong. Finally, after 2 long weeks, the detective contacted me, suggesting we meet to discuss his findings. I realized the detective had found something, but I couldn't understand how. I hadn't noticed anything suspicious about my wife. The day after, we agreed to meet at a cafe, and sitting at a table, I tried to calm myself with a cup of coffee, but every sip seemed bitter. The time until the detective's arrival stretched on endlessly. When he finally appeared, I felt my heart begin to beat even faster. The detective seemed calm and collected, as always. He sat opposite me, took several envelopes out of his briefcase, and placed them on the table. "Frank," he began, "I've conducted a thorough investigation, as you requested. Here's what I managed to find out." The first envelope contained photographs. Sarah and Kevin were captured together in various places, in a cafe, in a park, at our house, and at his. In each photograph, they were too close to each other for just friends. The next envelope contained excerpts from surveillance reports. The detective detailed their meetings, conversations that were overheard, and even their visits to one of the hotels. Reading these lines, I felt my life beginning to crumble before my eyes. I also spoke with several people who saw them together. All of them confirmed that Sarah and Kevin behaved like a couple, the detective continued, observing my reaction. I listened to him, feeling a numbness envelop me. It was too much. A part of me still hoped that this was just some misunderstanding, that there was a reasonable explanation for everything happening. "What should I do now?" I asked when the detective finished. My voice sounded foreign even to myself. The detective sighed. "Frank, I can't tell you what to do. It's your life, your choice. But remember, despite everything, there's always a way forward." Returning home after meeting with the detective, I felt as though I was in a fog. I needed time to think everything over. I decided not to take any action in a burst of emotion. It was important to make a considered decision, despite the pain and betrayal I was experiencing. The next day, I went to a bar to meet with Kevin. I wanted to look him in the eye and try to engage him in dialogue. When I saw Kevin entering the bar, my hands involuntarily clenched into fists. He approached me with a smile, but upon noticing my gaze, his facial expression changed. "Hi, Frank, how's it going?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "We need to talk, Kevin," I said quietly, trying to control my emotions. "What's up, buddy?" he asked. "The thing is, I suspect my wife of cheating, and I don't know what to do," I began cautiously. "Really? Why do you suspect that?" Kevin asked, surprised. "I've started to notice strange things. She's been staying late at work more often, spends more time on her phone, we've been having less sex, and overall it seems like she's lost interest in me," I said. "You know what I think," Kevin began and asked the bartender to pour us some beer. "I think you're just overworked and shouldn't worry. My Deborah sometimes acts weird too, but after a while everything gets back to normal. Now if you find evidence, then it's time to raise a red flag, but otherwise it's just empty worries." Kevin finished, and I looked him straight in the eye. He said this with an unforced calm and cold gaze, trying to convince me everything was fine. At that moment I wanted to pull out a folder of evidence, but I held back and didn't rush things. I tried to get to the truth by asking more direct and provocative questions, but Kevin continued to dodge. In the end, I realized that I would not achieve anything. My suspicions were confirmed not only by the detective's words but also by Kevin's behavior. He knew I was suspecting something, and his reaction was a clear confirmation of this. After an unsuccessful meeting with Kevin, I felt drained. It was clear to me that the next step should be a conversation with Sarah, but I also understood that a single conversation wouldn't be enough. She needed to feel my pain, or at least pay for what she had done. I needed to contact Deborah, Kevin's wife, so I went to her social media page and sent her a message saying we needed to meet, but Kevin must not know, and I sent her blurred documents as proof of her husband's infidelity. Deborah agreed to meet me at a cafe near our area, a place where we could talk without unwanted ears. I arrived early and chose a secluded table in the corner where we could speak freely. My heart was pounding as I waited for her arrival. Part of me still hoped it was all just a bad dream, but deep down, I knew the truth. When Deborah entered, I immediately saw a reflection of my own anxiety in her eyes. She looked tense, but at the same time, there was determination in her demeanor. We greeted each other, and she sat down opposite me. "Frank, I don't even know where to start," she began, her voice trembling with emotion. "Deborah, I understand how difficult this must be for you, but we both know why we're here," I said, trying to maintain eye contact. She nodded, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "Deborah told me that she had suspected Kevin's infidelity for some time, but didn't want to believe it without basis. She noticed how he had been staying late at work more often and how his behavior had changed in recent months. However, she had no concrete evidence, just vague suspicions and worries. I told her about the detective, the photographs, and the reports I had managed to obtain. Her eyes filled with tears as she listened, but she held strong. After I finished, there was a heavy silence. "Frank, I'm so sorry for what happened. I didn't know Kevin could—" "With Sarah," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Deborah, it's not your fault. We both faced betrayal we didn't deserve," I replied, feeling a solidarity between us in this difficult situation. We discussed how we should both proceed. I proposed a plan to Deborah that would kill two birds with one stone, and she agreed. The plan was to provoke jealousy in my wife. Deborah was to go home and tell Kevin that she was going to the city to be with her parents tomorrow. Supposedly her mom was hospitalized and she needed to be by her side. Meanwhile, I would not return home in the evening but would stay at a hotel with Deborah. My wife would call me to find out where I was, and Deborah would pick up the phone and start arguing with my wife, during which Sarah would come to the hotel, and we would expose their affair. The plan was quite simple, but it seemed to me the most effective. So the next morning, I left for work and so did Sarah, while Deborah informed me that Kevin had let her go. I liked that everything was going according to plan so far. I finished work at 6 in the evening and immediately headed to the hotel, as my wife was supposed to finish work at 5. Deborah was already waiting for me in the hotel room, so I entered, and we started preparing all the documents and the words we had to say. 2 hours passed, and I received a text message from Sarah. "Honey, I'm stuck at work. We'll be late. They made me do a report again." And I realized things were not going well. Sarah was likely with Kevin, or she indeed had work. I didn't know what to do, and eventually suggested to Deborah that we postpone the meeting to the next day. Deborah was supposed to stay in the room overnight, and I planned to go home. Deborah came out into the hallway with me to see me to my car, but as we walked down the corridor, we saw Kevin, who was walking with a bottle of water and in a robe, his head down, so he didn't notice us right away. But at some point, he looked up and saw us with Deborah. "What the hell, Frank? What are you doing in the hotel with my wife? And you, Deborah, were supposed to be at your mother's," Kevin said sternly. I realized I needed to change the plan of action, so I grabbed Kevin by the neck and pressed him against the wall, covering his mouth. I was bigger and stronger than him, so he couldn't resist me. "Now listen to me carefully. I know you're sleeping with my wife, and it's pointless for you to deny it. So to avoid me harming you, you're going to tell me the room number where Sarah is," I said, and Kevin turned red. I loosened my grip slightly, and Kevin, with faltering breath, gave the room number, 219. I grabbed Kevin by the robe and forcefully dragged him to Deborah's room, who was observing everything that was happening. I dragged him into the room, took his phone from his pocket and locked him in the bathroom with a key to prevent him from interfering. I left Deborah with Kevin alone, hinting that they should talk, changed into a robe, and headed to room 219. I entered without much effort and saw a small coffee table with a bottle of wine, 2 glasses, a fruit and cheese platter, and candles lit, creating a welcoming atmosphere. Suddenly, I heard my wife's voice from the bathroom. "Oh, sweetie, you're back and I'm almost done. Go lie down in bed, I'll come to you soon," Sarah said. I didn't say anything back to her. I obediently went to bed and started waiting for her to appear. Suddenly, the door opened, and there stood a real beauty, my wife Sarah, in a revealing bunny costume I had never seen her wear before. She looked very sexy. "I've missed you so much, Tiger," she began, evidently not recognizing me in the dark. "I've missed you too, my soon-to-be ex-wife," I blurted out, and her silhouette froze. "It can't be," said Sarah after a couple of seconds. "Oh, but it can," I replied. "This is not what you think," she started. "Really? I thought you were preparing for a pajama party," I said. "Sweetie, please don't be mad," she pleaded. "Why did you do this?" I asked. And at that moment, an angry Deborah burst into the room yelling, "There you are, bitch," and attacked Sarah, starting a fight. It was amusing to watch them fight, with Deborah clearly having the upper hand since she ended up holding more of Sarah's hair. I lay on the bed, not even thinking about separating them. But then, when Deborah unexpectedly grabbed a wine bottle planning to hit Sarah on the head with it, I intervened, taking the bottle from her and said, "You don't want to end up in jail over this." But they continued to fight, Deborah pulling Sarah's hair while she screamed hysterically for help. Then Deborah knocked Sarah to the ground and started scratching her face with her nails, which was truly epic. Later, I found out that Deborah had a one-on-one talk with Kevin, and Kevin told her something that drove Deborah mad. I didn't think my former friend was such a fool to say such things to his wife, but what he said, I'll tell you later. I realized it was time to end the scuffle and pulled Deborah away from Sarah, who was lying on the floor, powerless. I pulled out a folder with divorce papers and a copy of the photos that a private detective had given me. I hope you understand that every action has its consequences. In this folder are all the evidences of your infidelity to me, and these are the documents you need to sign, I said. I don't want a divorce, Sarah whispered barely audibly. What do you want then? We will get divorced and you can live with Kevin. He will also be free soon, I said. I don't want to, Sarah began to plead with tears in her eyes. The only thing you can do to prevent our daughter from learning all the terrible details is to tell the truth about why, when, and why you started secretly meeting with my friend and Deborah's husband, I said and helped Sarah get up. Deborah gave her a bottle of water, and we waited a couple of minutes for Sarah to compose herself and stop crying. It all started about 4 months ago when Kevin came to our house while you were at work. He came under the pretext of wanting to see you and didn't know you were working. She took a short pause and continued. So I told him you were at work and that we had plans for the evening. As a gesture of hospitality, I offered him some tea, but we never got to it. He started talking about how he had dreamed of me and how he envied you for having such a wife. He began to touch me. I resisted, but he insisted, and I couldn't do anything about it. He convinced me it would be just once and no one would find out, and eventually he managed to get me into bed. A few days after that, I was going to tell you everything, but Kevin appeared at our doorstep again while you were at work. At first, I refused him and said I would tell you everything, but he took out his phone and showed a video of us having sex and threatened that if I told anyone, he would ruin my life and the video would be all over social media. In the end, he came to me whenever he wanted and summoned me wherever he wanted. He threatened me, and I was too scared to confess to you because it seemed too late to say anything. Sarah finished her version of the story, and Deborah and I exchanged looks. I realized that Sarah was lying, trying to portray herself as the victim in this situation. Deborah began to speak. You're lying because Kevin told me the exact opposite story, saying that it was you who harassed and blackmailed him. And then I realized why Deborah was so angry. She thought my wife was the provocateur, but now we understood that it was all nonsense, and it was time to end this circus. Please forgive me, Sarah said, and I helped her to her feet and led her to the bathroom. She tried to kiss me, but I turned her away, feeling disgusted. I entered the bathroom with her and quickly left, locking the door behind me. Think about your behavior, I yelled at her, and Deborah and I left the room. We entered another room where Kevin was also locked in the bathroom. We gathered our belongings, and as we approached the door, I told him, I thought you were my friend, but you turned it out to be a real scoundrel. With those words, Deborah and I left the room and handed the keys to the hotel administrator. The next morning, the cleaning lady was supposed to release the traitors. Deborah and I went our separate ways, me to my place and she to hers. I didn't tell my daughter what had happened and that we were planning to divorce her mother, but I knew that in the coming days, I would have to tell her. The next day, I contacted the most expensive lawyer in town and met with him in a cafe to discuss the details of the divorce and to ensure that Sarah and Kevin faced severe punishment for their betrayal. I went home, where Sarah was waiting for me, and my daughter was at school. Sarah immediately tried to apologize, but I handed her a paper and said that we needed to divorce, that it would be better for both of us. After a few days, she finally signed the paper, and I stayed home because I didn't want our daughter to suspect anything. When Sarah was at work, I decided to talk to Amy and prepare her for our divorce. When Amy came down for lunch, I asked her to stay with me in the living room after she finished eating. She looked at me questioningly, but nodded in agreement. I took Amy's hands and looked into her eyes. Amy, there's something I need to talk to you about, I began, trying to choose my words carefully to prepare her as gently as possible for the upcoming conversation. Your mom and I are going through some things that we're trying to sort out. I want you to know that no matter what happens, we both love you very much, and nothing will change that, I continued, feeling a lump in my throat. Amy looked at me with wide eyes, in which I saw a mix of understanding and fear. Dad, are you and Mom getting divorced? She asked directly. surprising me with her insight. Yes, Amy. If Mom wants to, she'll tell you what happened. But it's important for you to know that we will always be there for you, no matter what, I replied, feeling my eyes start to fill with tears. Amy silently threw herself into my arms, and we hugged, both feeling the weight and complexity of the moment. I love you both so much, she whispered. This conversation with Amy was one of the most difficult in my life. But at the same time, it brought me some relief. It was important for her to know the truth, to feel involved, and to understand what was happening in her family. It was the first step towards resolving our situation, a step I had to take before moving forward. I packed my things and left for a hotel. I could no longer stay in the house with someone who had blatantly deceived me. A month later, the court proceedings took place, and Sarah and I got divorced. I left her the house where she lived with our daughter, and I will now be paying alimony every month. Deborah divorced Kevin, and Kevin left town. Sarah hoped that after our divorce, Kevin would want to live with her, but he turned out to be a coward and decided to run away. Sometime later, while I was looking for housing, Deborah invited me to her home, and we ended up having sex. And eventually, Deborah invited me to stay at her place forever. I liked the idea, and we started living together and dating. I don't know where this will lead, but I hope that things will only get better.
That's the end of the story. Write your opinion in the comments about this story. It will be interesting for us to read it. Also, do not forget to like and subscribe to our channel so as not to miss new, equally interesting and exciting stories. Good luck!